The day I walked out of my son's house, I had one bag. One bag after 84 years of living. And I want to tell you something. It was the lightest I had felt in years. I'm Samuel. I'm 84 years old. And I'm going to tell you about the afternoon I chose myself for the very first time. I should start a little further back, because nothing happens in a single afternoon. Things build. They build slowly, the way water finds its way through stone. Not with force, just with time and persistence and the daily drip of small moments that you tell yourself don't matter. That's how it happened to me, over years, over quiet dinners where I ate without being spoken to, over birthdays that came and went, over a front room in my son's house where I slept on a fold-out couch for 8 months because the guest room was being used for storage. His storage. My couch. My name was Samuel Delaney before I became Dad. And then, somewhere in that house, before I became nothing much at all. I raised Marcus on my own from the time he was 11 years old. His mother, my wife Gloria, passed from a stroke on a Tuesday morning in October. Marcus was doing a school project on the kitchen table when I got the call. I remember coming home that afternoon and not knowing how to say it. I stood in the doorway for a long time just watching him color something with a red crayon. I didn't want to change his world yet. I stood there maybe 5 minutes before he looked up and saw my face. He didn't need me to say anything. He already knew. We were close after that. I want you to understand that. We were very close. I worked 2 jobs for most of his teenage years, a maintenance position at a school and weekend shifts at a hardware store, and I never once let him feel the weight of it. I didn't want him carrying what wasn't his to carry. I paid for his college, the first 2 years at least, before he got a partial scholarship. I drove 4 hours each way to watch him graduate. I sat in that auditorium in a shirt and tie I had pressed myself, and when they called his name, I cried in a way I hadn't cried since Gloria. That man, the young man I raised, I loved him completely. I still do. But somewhere between that graduation and the Thursday afternoon, I picked up my one bag and walked out his front door. Something happened to him. Or maybe something happened between us. I'm not entirely sure which, and at 84, I've made my peace with not being sure. He married a woman named Denise about 12 years ago. I had nothing against Denise. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy to make her the villain of this story, and she isn't, not entirely. But she set a tone in that house. A tone about how things were done, about whose opinions mattered, about space, about money, about me. And Marcus never once pushed back against it. That's the part that took me a long time to name. It wasn't what Denise said or did. It was what Marcus didn't say, what he never did. The silence where a son should have been. I had my own apartment for a long time after Gloria passed. A small place near the park, nothing fancy but mine. I had my chair by the window. I had my routine. I had a neighbor named Thomas who would sometimes sit on the steps with me in the evening. I had a life that was quiet and small and entirely my own. Then my knees started going. Then I had a small health scare. Nothing devastating but enough to worry Marcus. And he called me one Sunday and said, "Dad, we've been talking, and we think you should come stay with us for a while." I want to tell you what those words felt like. "We think you should come stay with us for a while." I heard care in those words. I heard my son. I gave up my apartment, sold half of what I owned, put the rest in a storage unit, and I moved into that house on a Saturday in March with 2 suitcases and a box of books and more gratitude than I knew what to do with. The fold-out couch came within the first 2 weeks. The guest room, I was told, needed to stay available. For guests, I was apparently not a guest, but also not quite a resident. I was something in between that didn't have a room. I slept on that couch for 8 months. My back has never fully recovered. Meals were a quiet education. Denise cooked for the family, which I understood and appreciated, but there was often something in the way she described what she'd made, directed to Marcus, to the kids, that made it clear I was eating alongside the family rather than with it. Small thing. The kind of small thing you file away and try to forget. Only the file gets full eventually. My grandchildren, Marcus's kids, Tyler and Amara, they were 8 and 10 when I moved in. I had been close to them before, holiday visits, summer afternoons, phone calls. But inside that house, something shifted. Denise had rules about the children's schedule, their screen time, their diet, their activities, and somehow my presence always seemed to complicate the rules. I was told, gently at first, and then less gently, not to give them snacks without asking, not to take them outside without telling someone first, not to let them stay up past their bedtime when I was watching them. All reasonable things on paper. But the way they were said, the tone, made it clear that I was not trusted, that I was not quite competent, that I was, at best, an inconvenience with a grandfather's face. I started spending more time in the front room. Then I started taking walks in the morning, just to have somewhere to go. I would walk to the park, sit on a bench, watch the pigeons, and feel something I couldn't name at the time but can name now. I was grieving. Not Gloria. I had grieved Gloria a long time ago. I was grieving Marcus. The Marcus I thought I knew. The Marcus who used to call me every Sunday just to talk. He still lived in that house with me, and I was grieving him. There was one afternoon, a Wednesday. I believe it was October again. October seems to find me at my lowest, when Tyler fell off his bike in the front yard. I was sitting near the window, I saw it happen, and I went out immediately. He wasn't badly hurt, a scraped knee, some shock, some tears. I picked him up and held him, and he put his face into my shoulder and cried the way children do when someone makes them feel safe. It was a moment of pure connection, the first real one I'd had in weeks, and I held on to it. Denise came out 3 minutes later. She took Tyler from my arms, looked at his knee, looked at me and said, "I'll handle it, Samuel." Her voice was not unkind exactly, but it was firm in a way that told me exactly where the line was. I stood in the front yard for a moment after they went inside. An old man standing alone in a yard that wasn't his. I went back to my couch. That night at dinner, nobody mentioned it. Not Tyler, not Denise, not Marcus. I sat at the table and ate, and the television was on, and everyone spoke around me, and I thought, this is what invisible feels like when you're still in the room. I started calling my old neighbor, Thomas, more often after that. He had moved to a smaller place, closer to his daughter, but we still talked. He used to say, "Samuel, you sound like a man who's trying to convince himself he's fine." Thomas was not wrong. I was working very hard at being fine. I was fine at breakfast, fine at dinner, fine on my couch, fine on my morning walks, fine. Until one afternoon I was not. It was a Thursday in February. Marcus had come home from work early. I was in the front room reading. and he came in and sat down, which was unusual. He didn't often come in there, and he said, "Dad, Denise and I have been talking." And I knew before the next sentence that whatever came next was going to change something. He said, "We think it might be better for everyone if we started looking at some options." He didn't say what options. He didn't need to. I knew. He was telling me in the gentlest possible language he could find that his wife wanted me out of their house and that he agreed with her, or at least that he wasn't going to disagree with her enough to matter. I didn't cry. I want you to know that. I was surprised by that myself. I sat very still and I looked at my son, and I thought about the boy coloring at the kitchen table with the red crayon. I thought about the graduation auditorium. I thought about 2 jobs and pressed shirts and 4-hour drives. And then I thought, you do not get to put me in a fold-out couch for 8 months and then hand me a pamphlet. I didn't say any of that. I said, "I understand, Marcus. I'll handle it." He looked relieved. That was the worst part. Not that he said it, that he looked relieved. I went to the front room that night, and I started making calls. Thomas knew of a senior living community nearby. Nothing luxurious, but decent. A small apartment with a real bed and a window and a door that locked from the inside. I called them Friday morning. I had a spot by the following week. I packed on a Thursday afternoon 3 weeks later. 1 bag. I had already put most things back into storage or given them away because there was no point pretending the fold-out couch was a life. Marcus was at work. Denise was out somewhere with the children. I left a note on the kitchen counter that said, "I've found a place. I'll call when I'm settled. Take care of each other. I love you all." Then I picked up my bag and I walked out the front door and I stood on the porch for a moment in the cold air and I breathed. I'm going to try to tell you what that breath felt like. It felt like putting down something very heavy that I had been carrying so long I had forgotten it was in my hands. The loneliness was already there. I won't pretend it wasn't. I knew I was walking toward quiet rooms and long evenings, and a phone that might not ring as often as I'd like. I knew all of that, and I walked toward it anyway because the loneliness I was heading for was honest. It didn't pretend to be family while making me feel like a burden. It didn't ask me to be grateful for a couch. It was just silence. Clean silence. Mine. I've been in my apartment for almost 2 years now. I have a chair by the window again. I have my books. I have Thomas, who visits sometimes and still tells me when I sound like I'm trying too hard to be fine. I have Tyler's drawings on my refrigerator because he started sending them to me by mail, which was his own idea, and which undoes me a little every time one arrives. Marcus and I speak on the phone occasionally. Not every Sunday. Not the way we used to. But sometimes. The conversations are careful. The way conversations are when both people know something happened that neither of them fully named. I don't need him to apologize. I stopped needing that a while ago. What I needed more was to stop waiting for it. Here is what I know at 84. You can love someone your entire life and still refuse to disappear for them. You can grieve the relationship you thought you had and still be grateful for the one that survives after the truth comes out. Walking away from my son's house did not mean I stopped being his father. It meant I remembered that I was also a man who deserved a room with a door, A man who deserved to hold his grandson without being moved aside. A man who, after 84 years, had earned the right to eat a meal and feel like he belonged at the table. Dignity is a small word for what it holds. I've thought about that a lot in the quiet of my apartment. People talk about dignity like it's something grand, something formal, something you lose all at once in a single dramatic moment. But that's not how I lost mine, and that's not how I got it back. I lost it slowly in small withdrawals I kept pretending weren't happening. I got it back in one afternoon, one bag, one breath on a cold porch. I'm Samuel. I'm 84 years old. And I am at peace in a way I did not know was still available to me. That's everything I wanted to say.